Welcome to the special bonus edition of the NFL NBA Rectable. As we mentioned, there was just so much Warriors news that we had to add in an extra little segment because with the signing of Andris Biedrins, the Warriors now have 15 players under contract. So, taking a look at this sort of potential Warriors depth chart, you have a starting lineup possibly of Monte Ellis at the point guard, Steven Jackson at shooting guard, Corey Maggette at the small forward, Al Harrington at the power forward, and Andris Biedrins at center. Looking at that second level, you have Marcus Williams, Kelenna Azubuike, Anthony Randolph, Brandon Wright, and Ronny Turiaf. And looking at that third column of the depth chart, you have C.J. Watson, Marco Bellinelli, Anthony Morrow, Richard Hendricks, and Kosta Perovic. So keep in mind that this is just a possible depth chart. It's not to say how minutes are going to be played. We have no idea what Nelly's thinking. But looking at this depth chart, Kevin, look at that possible starting lineup. This is based off of some of the things Nelly's mentioned at Summer League. What do you think of that starting lineup?
I really like this starting lineup, Alan. With the exception of Monte Ellis playing the point guard, this starting lineup is going to be scoring points. You have four guys on that starting lineup three guys who can score 20 points, and Al Harrington has shown that he can score 20 points a game as well. So that's four guys who can really put up 20-point-a-game numbers, and then you have Andris Biedrins, who can be a 15, 13-point scorer if he gets the minutes. Now, there are a lot of guys on that bench who are not going to be getting a lot of playing time, but I really like the starting five. It would be nice to see Monte Ellis play the two position, and maybe that's something that can happen in the future depending on how well Marcus Williams plays.
Okay, so let's look at that possibility then of, let's say theoretically Marcus Williams does come in, plays really well, gives the Warriors a little more of that true point guard that they're looking for. Who then, out of this starting lineup, do you think would be the odd person out? Like, who gets put to the bench?
Well, I think it would be Al Harrington, and his numbers I don't think are going to be as good as Steven Jackson or Corey Maggette. Those are two guys who I can see easily putting up 20 points a game, and Al Harrington I see somewhere around 15 points a game. And you've talked about it off camera, Alan, how Al Harrington is good for a free-flowing offense, but not necessarily a Nelly ball offense. And I think that's why his production will be a little lower than the rest of the guys. And Al Harrington can opt out after this season, and he might be good trade bait come February.
Yeah, as unfortunate as it is, he just doesn't seem to very gel well with Nelly in this system for some reason or not, because he has shown flashes of just being able to do anything, and he has such an all-around offensive game. Granted, he fits in with the rest of the Warriors, doesn't play very good defense, but he can get to the hoop, play a little post-up game. He's just so underutilized, I feel, by Nelly in this system. But the Nelly ball system is what it is. It demands big men that can just shoot the three and stretch the floor. But moving over to this bench real quick, there's not as much to say down low because you have Wright and Turiaf as your primary bench players in the post. They'll be fighting for minutes, but there's not much there. But looking at this backcourt, you have Marcus Williams now, C.J. Watson. They'll be having a battle for backup point guard. And Kelenna Azubuike and Marco Bellinelli. So out of those four, how do you see the minutes playing out?
Well, I see Williams and Azubuike getting the majority of those minutes, and C.J. Watson and Bellinelli taking a backseat. And that's why I'm against this Azubuike matching the offer sheet, because Marco Bellinelli can be so effective offensively. He is perfect for Nelly ball, I think. And Azubuike has shown that he can play well in the system, but Bellinelli at a cheaper price would fulfill that position, I think, just as well.
Right, but do you see any sort of possibility maybe because, looking at that depth chart again, say you take the starting five out, give them a breather, do you see possibly Bellinelli and Azubuike being able to play on the court at the same time? Maybe put Bellinelli at the 2, Azubuike at the 3, because Azubuike, even though he's only about 6'5" or so, he has a really, really built frame. He can, play a little, muscle a little bit with players a little bigger than him. I think that might be another way, again, it stretches the court a little bit, goes a little more traditional small ball, because, and that's the thing, I mean, you look at a Nelly ball system, it's traditionally very small, a lot of small players, and you do have that to some extent in the starting lineup, but it's also a very big starting lineup. Jackson, Maggette, Harrington, all of them naturally small forwards, so you're having a bigger backcourt with Jackson playing the two possibly, but a smaller sort of front court. But I think that, in a Nelly ball system, I think there's chances of putting Azubuike and Bellinelli together in the backcourt or on the court at the same time as that second unit. But looking at some of these other players now, I mean, looking at this team, the average age of this team is 23.46, and that's including, the three older players of Steven Jackson, Corey Maggette, and Al Hampton. If you take those three out, the rest of the team is only 22 years old. So who do you think here has the biggest potential of possibly not panning out? Because statistically, just the way the NBA goes, not all of these players are going to pan out the way the Warriors want. So who do you see as those sort of high reward, high risk players that the Warriors are developing?
Well, one of the guys that I think could be high reward, high risk is Brandon Wright. I don't think he's going to be a bust, but he definitely can be. And it's all dependent on whether he can develop a jump shot, if that jump shot can continue to improve, and if he can get a little bigger. If he doesn't get bigger physically, if he can't put on some weight, then I feel like he can have a real tough time defending low post players in this league.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. Although last year, in the limited minutes he got, he already shown that he could do some good things. Of course, the biggest issue, always been a known fact since he was drafted, needs to put more size on his frame. But he's only 20 years old, so he's not even fully developed at all yet. But one of the names that I see thrown around on places like ESPN is the name of Anthony Randolph. A lot of people are saying he's, a lot of potential, but very likely to bust as well. And I'm not so sure I see that. I think that, especially after this summer league, I think that with his versatility and his ability to handle the ball, which I think was far superior than anyone expected, I think that even if, maybe he might not be a superstar player, but at the 14th overall pick, you're not really expected to be a superstar. And I think that with the kind of skills that he could have a very easily, very effective career a la Lamar Odom, who his game reminds me a lot of, 6'10" player who can handle the basketball. So I'm not so sure that I necessarily see him, but I do see, I guess, potential there, because if he can't continue developing that game, get a better, sense of judgment, then he could be a bust. But looking at some of these other players, who do you think, has the most to lose, I guess, out of sort of that third column of players, C.J. Watson, Anthony Morrow, Richard Hendricks, and Kosta Perovic, the sort of, guys that are mostly there almost to fill out the roster? I mean, do you see any of those guys really being able to, in the future, steal a consistent role from the team?
I think C.J. Watson can definitely be that guy, and I thought he was going to be a solid backup before they even traded for Marcus Williams. And I mentioned Marco Bellinelli. That's another guy who I think can really be solid in this Nelly ball system. As far as the bench for the front court in this third line of the depth chart, I don't see much of these guys playing too much when we're talking about Richard Hendricks and Kosta Perovic. I think they'll just be guys who will play if a Turioff Wright gets injured.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. The one that sort of stands, I think the biggest question mark to me is Kosta Perovic. I mean, we really just have no idea what he's possible of, what he's capable of. I mean, he didn't even play in the summer league this year, so we didn't get a chance to see him at all. But I think that, at the same time, he's a second-round pick, so, those guys, for the most part, tend to be flyers. They just sort of get drafted. There's no guarantees, so who knows if he's ever going to really pan out. But either way, this team is just absolutely stacked with depth. It's just up to that coaching staff now to try and develop them into a sensible team. But even though there might be a hit, in these next couple years, that always happens. Losing Baron Davis, let's not forget about that. Is definitely going to be a hit for the next year, possibly two. But I mean, he only was going to be under contract for next season. But I think that this team definitely, there's a plan, there's something set in place, they're locked up for the next few years, and they could definitely contend, for the Western Conference championship possibly in 2-3 years when this team starts to develop and mature. All right, well, that's it for our bonus edition breakdown of the Warriors roster. Tune in next week on the NFL NBA Rectable.